structure at first. So a virus, it's got DNA and RNA up in the core, and then it's covered by a capsid, which is like a coating or like a kind of like a cell membrane, but it's not the same, but that's kind of the purpose it serves, is to protect or be around the DNA. And then, of course, you've got your living cell that's got a cell membrane, cytoplasm. Eukaryotic cells also have nucleus and organelles. When it comes to reproduction, how do viruses reproduce? What do they have to have? A living cell. They have to have a host because they can't do it on their own. Whereas the living cell, obviously can do cell division on its own, asexually or sexually. So genetic code, again, the virus can have DNA or RNA, and the living cell has to have DNA. Growth and development, do viruses grow and develop? No, right, because they're not living. But again, living cells do, and multicellular organisms, the cells increase in number and they also differentiate into specific purposes. So would viruses obtain energy? If they're not living, they don't need energy, right? Because they're not going to be expelling any energy. Whereas the living cell, it does. It does need the energy. What about response to the environment?
No.
No, viruses do not. But cells do. And then do viruses change over time?
Yeah.
How would they change over time?
Mutation.
Mutations in the DNA, right? That's the only way that they can change over time. And obviously, the living cell changes all the time. So again, we've already answered, are cells or viruses alive? And they're not. So they don't belong to any of the kingdoms because the kingdoms are all about living organisms. So we're going to go through the replication cycle of viruses. And there's two ways they can do it. They can either go through the lytic cycle or they can go through the lysogenic cycle. Have y'all ever heard of these cycles before? No. All right. Well, let's go through it then. All right. So number one up here, both cycles start this way. They have a phage DNA. The phage is the actual virus that's inserting the DNA. And then the phage attaches to the host and injects its DNA. And this is a bacterial chromosome. So this is a bacterial cell that the virus is injecting itself into. The phage DNA circularizes and enters the lytic or lysogenic cycle. So we'll go through the lytic cycle first. So you go down this way, and a new phage DNA and proteins are synthesized and assembled into virons. So this is where it's making new ones of itself. It's replicating. The cell lyses, which means it breaks open or it bursts, and it's going to release all these viruses out so that they can go and infect other bacterial cells. So then it just starts over. So instead, if it goes down this way and goes to the lysogenic cycle, you've got DNA phage integrates with bacterial chromosome by recombination, which we remember from doing that activity, and it becomes a prophage. So now we've got a prophage here. And the lysogenic bacterium reproduces normally. So then this prophage DNA that's got the virus DNA inside the bacterial DNA is going to replicate, and so as it's reproducing and creating new bacteria, this virus DNA is spreading to the new ones because it's already injected inside of this DNA. So then many cell divisions happen, so a lot of these cells are created. And then occasionally the prophage may excise from the bacterial chromosome by adding another recombination event, and then it initiates into the lytic cycle. So it can go into the lysogenic and then leave out through the lytic cycle. And it can go through the lytic cycle and then come back and enter into the lysogenic cycle. So do you understand the difference between the two?
No. Just kidding. I kind of.
Okay, explain it to me. What's the difference? What happens in the lytic cycle? Right, so new viruses are formed.
And then in the other cycle, it just affects the DNA.
Right.
Already.
So during the lytic cycle, it's actually making new virons, and then the cell is going to burst, and these virons are going to be spread. The lysogenic cycle is when it's going to put its DNA into the bacterial DNA, and it's going to spread through bacterial reproduction, and then it can go back and enter into the lytic cycle if it wants to. Yes? No? Maybe? Kind of? Ish? Alright, because for the next test, you got to know the difference. You got to be able to explain it. Alright, so what's the lysogenic cycle?
Whenever it Combined with the DNA.
Combines with DNA. And what's the lytic cycle?